We are Canadians. We have free healthcare and we also have good wine. The best country in the world, if you ask me. Okay, that's debatable. But we really do have good wine. Really, really good wine. No leftovers at all with our wine.
A lot of people are like, what do you do with leftover wine? And we're like, what do you mean?
Leftover wine? Eating leftovers.
I know, you're doing it wrong if there's leftover wine.
Canada is typically not a country that comes to mind when you hear about internationally recognized wines. With our very extreme climate, especially in the winter, one would not expect that we would do well growing a variety of grapes. Now, we were also a little late to the party when it came to serious commercial winemaking. Our story is older than many people realize. Vines were first planted in what is now Nova Scotia in 1611, but for centuries, the industry struggled because most classic European grape varieties could not reliably survive Canadian winters. Many producers relied on native grapes, but the wine they produced wasn't that great. But then came the 1970s and the 1980s, and with advancements in viticulture, with better vineyard practices and scientific research, we realized that premium European grape varieties could actually succeed in Canada's climate. Then in 1988, the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement exposed our wineries to international competition. And the industry had to either get serious or get out of the way. And then came Icewine as well, which changed the story for us entirely. That's Canada's golden child. We'll get to it in a few minutes. They're a mix of four forces that have created and still sustain every Canadian wine region. There's climate constraints, geography, tourism demand, and policy. Anyone that knows about wine production will tell you about the unique conditions required to grow grapes. Specific temperature bands, long growing seasons, particular soil drainage. Canada, the best country, fails most of these tests for most of its landmass. The country is simply too cold in most areas. The winters are brutal, and we have a very short growing window. So most of the European grape varieties were not designed for any of this. But there are three distinct regions, and I visited all three of them. They were somehow able to counteract this. They have narrow pockets where geography creates just enough shelter from the broader climate. They have microclimates carved out by lakes, mountain ridges, and ocean currents, which have made them to be not just able to grow grapes, but also produce some of the best wines in the world. The different geographic mechanisms across these three regions, the lake moderation in the Niagara Peninsula, the valley and desert microclimate in the Okanagan Valley, and the ocean tidal influence in the Annapolis Valley help to extend the growing season just enough to make quality viticulture possible. We'll get to each one of those regions in a minute. Every bottle of 100% Canadian wine generates approximately $89.99 in economic activity across agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and hospitality. So these wine regions in Canada are not just purely agricultural, they are actually tourism-driven ecosystems. The bottle of wine is almost secondary to the experience that has been built around it. The VQA, the Vintners Quality Alliance, was introduced in 1988, and it helped to create a quality and origin standard that gave Canadian wine a credibility framework. Because before the VQA, there was no reliable way for a consumer to know that what they were buying was actually a quality Canadian product. Alright, let's get to the fun part. My first stop on my wine tasting tour is here in Niagara. The Niagara Peninsula sits wedged between Lake Ontario to the north and the Niagara Escarpment to the south, and that specific sandwich is why wine production here works. Ontario's wine region sits between 41 and 44 degrees north, the same exact latitude as Burgundy, France. But without the lakes, we really wouldn't have much of a wine story to tell. Lake Ontario moderates temperature in both regions. It cools hot summers and it buffers the brutal winters, so it's able to extend the growing season at both ends, both in the summer and in the winter. The escarpment itself acts as a physical wall that redirects cold lake winds back upward, preventing cold air from settling on the vineyards. In the spring, the cold lake water actually slows down the ground from warming too fast, which helps to protect early pods.
And then we are planted north to south for a reason. So first being sun exposure, sun rises and sets east to west. So it gets all the sun all day, all summer. And then also north of us is Lake Ontario, and south of us is the Niagara Escarpment, just high kind of hill of rocks. That breeze will kind of hit the escarpment and bounce back. So we have that nice breeze. It's keeping all of our grapes nice and dry. And we do need 100 days of sunshine for the grapes to fully ripen. So a good vintage year for our wine will be a hot, dry summer. Maybe not a great start this year, but you never know. Maybe it'll turn around. On the TV here is a little behind the scenes of harvest. So as I mentioned out in the vineyard, we do need 100 days of sunshine for the grapes to fully ripen. You can see Jamie Slingerland actually driving the tractor above the vineyard there. So this fun tractor is just pretty much shaking the grapes off the vine. It's very convenient, a little bit less time than hand picking all of our grapes. A tractor like this would probably retail for about $1 million. And it collects a lot of grapes, probably a container weighing 8 tons amount. And then after we do collect the grapes, we're gonna bring them in here. This is where all the magic happens. They're gonna come through these garage doors, and the whole point of this room here is to sort the grapes, destem them, and crush them so we could turn juice into wine. So you'll actually see, I will show very shortly on the TV, we pretty much just sort them, put it through our destemmer, which just shakes it, and then we separate them. And then the grapes will go through a bladder press over there. It's the machine with the red in the front. So it's pretty much just like a big balloon inside. It's gently inflating, and it's pressing the grapes along the hard side of the tank so that we can extract that grape juice without crushing the seeds. We don't want any bitter wine. And then after we do crush those grapes, we will take that grape juice and place it into our stainless steel tanks here for fermentation, which is just the process of us adding yeast, produces our alcohol and byproducts of heat and carbon dioxide. We do produce about just over 1 million bottles every year, and half of that is Icewine. So we are known for our Icewine in the region. We're the largest estate producers of Icewine in the world. Have you guys tried Icewine before? No?
Like I mentioned earlier, Icewine changed the story for Canada's wine industry. It's the one product that we don't just produce, but we also perfected. Because our winter, which every other wine region would consider a liability, is the same mechanism that makes Icewine work. To produce ice wine, grapes are left to freeze on the vine. The water in the juice turns to ice. What gets pressed out is intensely concentrated sugar and flavor. You need temperatures that drop reliably to around -8 degrees Celsius or colder to produce ice wine. Needless to say, Canada has that in abundance. Today, Canada is the world's leading producer of ice wine, and we make more ice wine here than all countries combined. The primary grapes we use are Vidal, Riesling, and Cabernet Franc. Ontario alone produces about 80% of the world's ice wine. I'll be sure to remember this fact when it's winter and everywhere starts freezing again. Nothing more comforting than knowing that the snow blizzard is just perfect to make good ice wine. The Niagara Peninsula alone is divided into 10 sub-appellations, and each is mapped out by altitude, soil, and proximity to the lakes. This is the exact same pricing mechanisms the Europeans have been using for centuries, because the more precisely you can define where a wine comes from, the more you can charge for it. Niagara Peninsula has approximately 75 wineries and has been producing wine commercially since the early 1970s. And interestingly, Ontario has fewer wineries than British Columbia, but we have more hectares of vine planted. Today, Niagara-on-the-Lake has become a fully built-out wine tourism destination, with the historic towns, the wineries, the organized tasting parties, the restaurant winery pairings. It's a vibe. But the single biggest economic driver of Niagara wine country is not the wine, it's Toronto. Toronto is about 90 minutes away, and that proximity has helped to create a massive, reliable day trip or a weekend trip demand that no other Canadian wine region can match by geography. So with the high visitor volume, with the accessible pricing, with the established infrastructure, Niagara Peninsula has become a very stable, high-revenue tourism economy. Next, I'm here in British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley. The Okanagan Valley is Canada's only desert microclimate. It looks nothing like what most people picture when they think of Canada. It actually sits below the 50th parallel, the same latitude as Champagne, France. But unlike Champagne, it's dry, it's sunny, and it's hot, with over 2,000 sunshine hours per year. Those long summer days allow grapes to ripen despite the short season. The 135-kilometer Lake Okanagan moderates temperature extremes in both summer and winter, extending the growing window. And then there's the temperature swing between day and night. It's warm enough during the day to ripen the fruits, but cool enough at night to lock in acidity and freshness.
It's kind of a fun trait of Okanagan-grown Pinot Noirs is that they tend to finish with a little peppery spice note to it. So this one pairs beautifully with ribs, pork chops on the grill. It is great with margarita pizza, and we do have pizza here.
That pepper finish isn't random. It's a direct expression of the cool ice and the volcanic soil. So what you taste in the glass is a product of the geography. In 1984, there were 13 wineries in British Columbia. Today, there are almost 200 wineries in the Okanagan Valley alone. That kind of growth in 40 years doesn't happen without serious economic pressure. And the serious economic pressure on the finest amount of viable land has a predictable outcome. The land that can actually grow wine grapes here is genuinely constrained. The viable benchland between the lake and the hills is finite. And it's under pressure from both the vineyard expansions and the residential real estate development. My last stop is here in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia. Annapolis Valley sits on Canada's Atlantic coast and it's sandwiched between the north and the south mountain ridges with the Bay of Fundy on one side. The Bay of Fundy has the highest tides in the world, and those tides function as a natural temperature regulator because it stores heat and releases it slowly, moderating what would otherwise be a climate too extreme for viticulture. So the valley soil here is rich in minerals, which provides excellent drainage and also contributes to the high acidity mineral character of the wine. The founding of the modern Annapolis Valley wine industry dates back to 1979.
In Atlantic, Canada. We were started in 1979 by a gentleman named Roger Dial. He moved up from California to be a poli-sci professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Like many people from the city, he drove through the Annapolis Valley and he fell in love with the beauty around him, so he decided to buy a piece of farmland, which we're now all standing on. At first, Roger was going to be more of a gentleman farmer, grow some tomatoes, some zucchinis, but as he looked at the seasons, he said, I think you could grow wine grapes here. And everyone in Nova Scotia thought he was insane because the only sort of wine industry we had at that point in time was our parents' homemade rhubarb wine, which was not going to win any international awards. Honestly, you'd be lucky if you didn't go blind. But Roger said, I don't care, I'm still going to give it a go. And we're so happy he did because here we are, 40 plus years later with a booming wine industry, as you folks have discovered today. So fun. Now, fast forward a few years later, a few different owners later, 1994, Hans-Peter Stutz is a Swiss businessman traveling through Nova Scotia looking for investment farm properties for his clients back in Switzerland. Hans-Peter stumbles upon this vineyard, which was for sale. A little rundown, a little rough around the edges, but he fell in love. So back to Switzerland he went to tell his family he'd had one too many glasses of rhubarb wine and he accidentally bought a winery.
Today, Nova Scotia has approximately 22 wineries. Ontario has about 190. British Columbia has over 300 wineries. The province of Nova Scotia itself has approximately 890 acres of vines planted. Again, compared to Okanagan's 9,600 plus acres. So it's genuinely a very small industry. But Nova Scotia does not compete on scale, it's competing on climate identity.
But as we got to the second winery, we entered their main gates, these beautiful gates, and we cycled through the vineyard for 20 minutes until we got to the production building. We didn't veer off path. It was 20 minutes straight biking. Wow. And I asked the tour guide, I said, how big is this vineyard? She said, oh, last I heard, it's about 600 hectares.
Oh, good. Oh my God.
4 acres and a hectare.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did some quick math in my head, and I told her, I said, that's more than double all the grapevines in Nova Scotia.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
She laughed at me, and she said, for the owner, this is just a hobby. Just a hobby.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, today in 2025, Nova Scotia now has 485 hectares of vines. So we are still smaller as an industry than a hobby winery in Chile. So that's why we had to create Tidal Bay to get the word out there that we are a legitimate wine region with something to showcase. And that's why Tidal Bay exists.
Here you go.
Isn't that a cool story?
Yeah. Tidal Bay is the region's own appellation wine, and it was engineered specifically for the climate and the cuisine. Virtually every winery in Nova Scotia produces its own version of Tidal Bay, and while the parameters are strict, each one tastes slightly different.
Where our wine industry is still so new, the Wine Association wanted to make it easy for people who weren't familiar with our wine industry to try it and see what we do here. We didn't want you to find sort of some random bottle of red wine that maybe wasn't the best and then decide that we couldn't make wine. So they got together and they wanted it to be a crisp, refreshing white wine that pairs beautifully with seafood because we're Nova Scotia. Lobster's in our blood.
Yep.
I had a lobster yesterday. So at the end of the day, that is. But they made it sort of fun so that nobody had to do exactly the same as their neighbors. So our Tidal Bay is a blend of 5. Lac-a-Di Blanc, Seyval, Vidal, Ortega, and New York Muscat. So on the nose, it's going to smell, again, some lemon, some citrus, apple blossom, a little bit of a juicy stone fruit, so like a peach. On the palate, it's not nearly as dry as the Lac-a-Di Blanc, but nor is it super sweet. It's kind of right in the middle. Great with seafood, great with poultry, great with cheese, or just great to sip on a patio with or without friends. So here we go. How do you like the Tidal Bay?
Nice.
Can you taste the difference between the other 2 you've had today? Yeah. It's funny because you'd think with such strict parameters, only certain grapes were allowed to use, rules around alcohol, sugar content, you'd think that they wouldn't be that different, but they really quite are, which makes it so fun. This year there are 16 new vintages of Tidal Bay, so we encourage people to have Tidal Bay parties, you and 15 friends, or just you, no one's judging. Get all 16 bottles, line them up, crack them open, and see which one's your favorite. Because even us, we use the same 5 grapes every year, but our percentages will still change. So even our wine will change a little different from year to year too. And I will do a shout out. This is the first year that Nova Scotia now also has a cider appellation. So it's the same idea. It's a hard cider. It's called Red Sky. Everybody maybe who lives on water knows Red Sky at night, Sailor's Delight, Red Sky in the morning, Sailors Take Warning. So just sort of a little nod to our mariner's history here. But same idea, there's only certain apples they're allowed to use. They have to go through a blind taste test. And so there's 8 different producers that now have this Red Sky cider appellation. And we always like to shout out Beausoleil. They're over in Port Williams. They're a cidery and a winery, and they have both. They have a Red Sky and a Tidal Bay. And they're the only producer so far who's had both available. So that's another fun one you can kind of check out if you're locals. If you're not locals, you just have to come back again and try them all.
Lac-a-Di Blanc is also one of the signature grape here. It's a cold hardy hybrid variety that was developed specifically to survive Nova Scotia's winters and still produce quality wine.
To sort of the history of this wine. This is our driest still white wine that we do here at Domaine de Grand Pré. This grape is Nova Scotia's #1 variety in the whole province. It's a hybrid grape, and it was actually developed in southern Ontario. It was too hot there. It didn't have a name, it just had a number. They weren't super impressed. They suspected it was because it was too warm. So they shipped it to Nova Scotia, where it was cooler. And Roger Dial, when he first started the winery, he was the very first person who planted this grapevine out in a working vineyard. This is it right behind us here. And he fell in love with it, and he was actually the one who got to name it. So he named it Lac Blanc after the French-Acadian history of this area. So he very much wanted to immortalize those people, because without them, we wouldn't really be where we are today, because they have created all of this beautiful farmland that makes the valley so special. So translated, it means Acadian white. So on the nose, you're going to hopefully have, like I said, some apple blossom, citrus, just really bright, refreshing flavors. On the palate, on your tongue, it's quite a dry finish, which for me feels like goosebumps, kind of along the sides of my tongue. And it's also very high in acidity, which you're going to feel back here.
Thank you.
You were very welcome.
Sparkling wine has become Nova Scotia's flagship category for the same reason Icewine works in Ontario. The cold climate, the high natural acidity, and the short growing season help to produce grapes with exactly the freshness that traditional method sparkling wine requires.
It makes sense, this being Nova Scotia's #1 grape variety, that it's going to pair beautifully with anything that comes out of our ocean. Yeah. So think scallops, mussels, lobster. It's got that nice brightness to cut through all the richness, but it's not super overpowering on the palate, that it doesn't take over what the food tastes like as well. So that is Lac Blanc in a nutshell. Any questions so far? Everybody enjoying the breeze, cooling down a little bit? Yeah, great. Good.
Wineries here in Annapolis Valley do more than just Lac Blanc and Tidal Bay. They are actually also known for their reds and hybrids.
For a long time, people thought that Nova Scotia couldn't produce red wines. We can. It's just that because we're a cooler climate and we have a really short growing season, we use a lot of hybrid variety grapes. We passed Leon Milot our way up the hill. They were the really tall grapevines. And the joke is that even the hybrid grapes themselves look a lot like Nova Scotians. They're small, they're thick-skinned, they're disease-resistant. They just kind of squat there and they're like, bring it on. This is a good representation. They're getting from Dartmouth. You can kind of get a vibe from them. The one who couldn't remember her grandparents' names, you know. So Nova Scotia can produce red wines. They just tend to be a little bit lighter in body, more light to medium, and they tend to have a little bit more fruit-forward notes, and sometimes they can have a little bit more acidity on the tail end. That acidity, so all that means is maybe you want to open the bottle in the morning and let it breathe for the day before you pour it at night, or pour it through an aerator as you go through. The acidity, though, means that just like Nova Scotia women, they age beautifully. So if you find a red wine that you really love, you can put it away for 6, 7, 8, 10 years, and it will reward you for that patience, because it will get more complex, a little bit softer, a little bit more mellow overall. The one we're going to have today is called Field Blend, and this is a blend of 4 different grape varieties from multiple vintages. We know you guys probably have no self-restraint, so you're not going to be able to age the wine at home, so we've done it for you here. So this goes back to 2021 for the vintages. The 4 grapes are Leon Milot, Maréchal Foch, Castel, and Marquette. So all hybrid varieties. Castel would kind of be a little bit like a Malbec. Marquette would be like a Pinot Noir, just to give you an idea of those 2 different grape varieties. So this one does have some oak on it. On the nose, you're going to have notes of plum and cherry. There's a little bit of baking spice on there as well, and a bit of black pepper. So this one's a medium body, but it has a really nice nose to it, a really nice depth of flavor on the palate. Do just remember, sacrificial sip, and then maybe don't judge it until your 3rd sip, just because it's going to take your taste buds a minute to catch up with what's happening. You're essentially running 3 marathons today with your tongues, and we're on the final leg here. So I'm going to come around and pour that for you, and we'll see how.
The interesting part in all of these, aside from all of the wine I got to drink, is how all of these 3 regions have essentially turned their geographic liability into a premium asset. And now they are building an entire visitor economy on top of the story they tell about it. So whether it's a desert in British Columbia, an escarpment in Ontario, or a foggy tidal valley in Nova Scotia, the mechanism is the same. The constraint became the product.